Hello everyone. In this model railway mini-series I'm going to go through the process I took to build a working signal box lever frame in 00 scale. And this is the first part in which I'm going to talk about the building of the signal box with a bit of a twist. And the twist is I want to be able to see into the signal box from behind through a kind of wall in the side of the baseboard, so that I can see when the levers actually move in the signal box. So the overall plan then, this is my track plan for the layout eventually. It's a modular layout with the different baseboards here shown in different colours. The baseboard I'm concerned with is the one with the curves on it, the one on the left in purple. So if I show you in the 3D viewer, I'm planning to have the signal here to control the curved set of points. With two home signals, there'll be a distance signal as well, but the distance signal will be static. And then I'm planning to put the signal box around here, kind of cut through by the side of the baseboard with a bit of perspex in the side of the baseboard so you can see in the signal box from behind, so you can see the levers moving. The signal box kit I'll be building is this one by LCUT Creative, a 00 gauge LNER signal box. And these are the signals themselves, built from an LNER lattice post kit by Ratio. And I've built them so these can be moved and illuminated as well with little LEDs behind lenses. The lenses are just made from PVA mixed with food colouring into a drilled hole in the signal. In terms of the signal box interior, that's going to be from this kit again by LCUT Creative, the medium signal box interior, which comes with these little levers and lever frames and other bits and bobs to be put inside the signal box. In terms of controlling those, I've built a little mock-up model in Blender here of the signal box walls, and then underneath planning to put in 4 servos there to control 4 adjacent levers with some sort of mechanism through the floor of the signal box. So then if you imagine the bottom of the view there being where it's cut through at an angle to be able to see the insides through the wall in the baseboard, there's space for the 4 servos underneath to control 4 levers in the signal box. So that's the overall plan. Before I get modelling anything, I want to make sure I've got the right position on the baseboard, it's going to fit properly, and also that I choose the right stair option. So this kit comes with a left and right stair option, and I want to make sure I choose the right one. So I've put this little piece of cardboard cut to size in the position on the baseboard where it might go. I've then blue tacked that to the cutting mat and traced around using a pencil and a coach the limits of clearance for the trains, and then added an extra margin of a couple of mil just to make sure I've got clearance. And then I take a steel ruler and a scalpel and cut out the floor part of the signal box kit so I can trace around that when put it in position and just make sure it's going to fit with the servos and everything on that piece of card that I've used. So with the floor in place and at the right angle, I tried the different walls in place for the different stairs configurations, whether stairs on the right or stairs on the left, and decided that having the stairs down to the right would probably make the most sense, given there's also going to be a privy on that wall, so it kind of needs the full width of that wall. Next then, I got the stairs and just made sure there was space for them, and the front wall as well, and just positioned that with the floor, got it all lined up where I wanted it, and traced around the floor to have it in position, and then I'll get the servos and make sure there's space for the servos as well inside that little rectangular area there. So again, just tracing around a servo there, marking where it's going to be actuating as the first one, and then using the little interior parts for the lever frame, housing one of those to mark the gaps between each lever, which is about 2mm, which is about the gap you can get between 2 servo arms as well, to work out the 4 positions of the levers that I'm going to be controlling on this, and then placing the final servo position and drawing around that, making sure that would fit as well, and it all seems to fit well. So that's enough planning, on to actually building it then. For this, I'm basically going to just follow through the instructions that come with the kit, with the exception that I probably won't have space to build the little balcony at the front, as that will overhang and interfere with passing trains. So the first step in the instructions is to install the windows. So in terms of glazing them, I was planning to use this piece of kind of plastic sheet from a COVID face shield, cut up into individual pieces for each window. The reason I want to do that rather than just the whole sheet at the back is it's going to be viewed from both sides. So I want to do each individual window so it's not just a whole sheet when you look from the side of the baseboard inwards. And then obviously I need to paint up the window frames. So these are the paints I'm using, the wool humbrol. So this is just a satin white for the window frames. And it's taken quite a while to do this carefully without getting it in the corners of the window, so take your time with this if you're doing this. And on the back side, doing over the laser cut burn marks, that takes quite a bit of effort, but maybe a coat or two to get that covered. I think particularly because it's white, so hopefully the other colours will be better. So while the paint on the window frames dries, paint the walls. This is Humbrol 71 satin oak that I'm using for these, and yeah, this seems to go on much quicker. It can be quite liberal with it really, just making sure you get the laser cut areas a couple of times to cover the burn marks, but otherwise it goes on quite well. I found when I went on to do the walls after this one that it was best to do the window areas, door areas first with one coat, then the outside, let it dry while you do another wall, and then come back to it, do the windows and areas again, and then the other side. So then I've done the rest of the walls up, and time to put the glazing in the windows and put the windows in the walls. For the glazing, the technique I used was to cut a strip of the plastic to the width of the window, then cut them to length and carefully place them in as a bit of a friction fit. Just while the paint on the windows was still a little bit tacky, it just helped hold them in place. And then any gaps that are left around the edges of the windows I filled with a very watery mix of PVA, and that, due to the surface tension, that just wicks into the gaps and glues into place the glazing in the little windows. I did consider using that product I just caught a glimpse of that, the crystal clear, but that had gone off. I've had it so long, so just watery PVA seemed to work fine for gluing them in place. It was very painstaking doing all these little pieces of glazing, but hopefully the slightly different angles will make it look much better when it's in the finished product, and also it'll look better from the internal view as well. So once the window frames are done, they get placed into the walls, and then again using a watery PVA and a paintbrush just around those edges, the surface tension wicking it into the gaps. That's how they're secured in place. It doesn't really matter if you go over into the glazing with this, because the surface tension again just pulls it into the gap between the glazing and the edge, so you end up with quite a nice finish, I think, if I do say so myself. Then the process is simply repeated for all the walls until they're ready for construction. For the doors and some of the accent features, I used Humbrol 120 matte light green. Before I start assembling things, I need to work out the interior layout. The reason being that the control actuators for the levers are going to go down through the floor inside, so I need to work out whereabouts on the floor I need to drill that hole, as it's going to be much easier to drill before I assemble the floor into the. So first step is to paint the floor. Here I'm using the Humbrol 160, which is a German camouflage red brown. It was quite old and rather thick, a bit bitty, a bit like shoe polish really, which isn't ideal, but hopefully it'll give it a bit of a textured finish, a bit like realistic floor planks would have. And then I cut out and glue on the supports for the floor onto the long-sided walls. Once that's dry, I can use a bit of masking tape in each of the corners to tape together the walls and drop in loosely the floor, and that way I get a really good idea of the shape of the structure and the space inside available for the little parts. So I can have a go then just placing the interior bits, the lever frame particularly, to make sure I can get those in the right place and drill the holes in the right place for the actuators to go down to the servos. I then decided, while I've got it taped up like this, to glue the two walls together that won't need any cutting to make them fit at the angle. So that's just those two walls, the front wall and the left side wall. I don't want to glue the other edges yet because those walls will need cutting to size, and I think that will be much easier as individual walls rather than as a combined unit. I then continue with the interior elements by putting together the instrument shelf, and I want to do that at this stage to make sure the lever frame is far enough back from the windows, the long wall, to make sure there's clearance when I drill the holes through the floor. So before I paint up the lever arms and lever frame, I've done a little piece of masking tape here, put the lever frame together, and started to think about how I'm going to do the actual mechanism to allow them to move, to be controlled by the servos underneath. So one idea I had was to use a little piece of fishing hook kind of cut off at the hook and the eye end, poking through here to enable me to have a little hole drilled in the levers and in the lever frame so it could pivot. But I think that's going to be too short because I'm really quite limited on the width I can drill through the levers themselves because they're quite small. So I've got these little 0.3 to 1.2 millimeter drill bits for the pillar drill, but I'm very limited to what I can use on that. So the best I can think of that's going to be long enough to go through enough of these, bearing in mind that I want the 4th to 7th levers to be the ones that are actually moving, is a little sewing needle. So hopefully I'll be able to drill a hole. I think this is about 0.7 millimeters in diameter, something like that. There's a fairly tight fit through a few of those, and then drill a slightly looser hole enough that the levers can move relative to this. So I'm going to have a go with that and keep my fingers crossed that I don't break one of these or ruin some of those. So after a trip downstairs to the pillar drill, this is the bases with the needle through. That looks quite good. And these are the little levers with holes drilled in the bottom. That was very close to being the wrong size, but seemed to work out. Then with the appropriate colour paints, they're just painted up. These are all gloss paints I used for the levers, and they end up looking like this. So then with the levers on the pin in the lever frame, the next thing to do is to remove the corner of the signal box. It's going to have the viewing window in it. So I was quite apprehensive about doing this, to be honest. I wasn't quite sure the best method to use, whether to use a very fine saw or something else, and whether to do it prior to or after assembling, but I decided prior to would be much easier while they're flat. So I used the scalpel as you see here with a steel ruler and holding the scalpel at an angle to try and get that angle that's going to be the back wall. And then I glued on a extra support for the floor because that's going to be cut off in that 4th corner that's getting removed, and then added the floor back, taped it up, and then glued it together with the second end wall in place. This process is then repeated for the rear wall. For the rear wall, the angle is so shallow that I couldn't cut it directly with the steel ruler. I had to do a straight cut and then kind of with a sawing motion go down through the wall to get the angle required. The floor then similarly is cut to shape with a scalpel and then has holes drilled in it in the places that they need to be for the controls for the levers. The holes are tidied up, and then the floor is put in place and glued into place to give the whole thing some structure. Then it's simply a case of following the instructions to add the raised woodwork in green there you can see on the signal box, and the bits for the end balcony with the privy and the stairs. These get cut, filed as required, painted and glued, just following the steps in the instructions. And that ends up looking like this. Next then it's time to add the roof. So the rear part gets measured and cut to size to fit the shape of the cutout at the back, and then the parts are painted up. This is Humbrol 111 matte uniform grey, which comes out of the pot looking quite dark, but by the time it's dried off looks a decent colour I think. and I want to leave the roof removable for now, so I'm going to glue together the two roof parts to the three supporting A-beam kind of things. And I'll do this first by gluing the three A-beams to the complete roof section, and then carefully positioning at the edge of the cutting mat so it protects the overhang, and gluing on the second roof part. Then once that's dry, I can cut off the excess parts of the supporting A-beams. I tried initially doing this with a scalpel, but that was too tricky, it just kind of wobbled around a bit. So I found the best technique was to use a pair of flush side cutters. And with the cabin stones added and painted and doing a bit of a test fit, you can see this is really starting to look the part. And then in terms of finishing the signal box off, it's a case of adding the ends to the roof. The internal parts are painted, glued in place, and yeah, this is what it looks like. I'm really quite pleased with how it looks for the end of this stage of the project. In terms of the chimney for the stove that's in the interior kit, that doesn't come with a top of a chimney, so it's just kind of a lollipop stick for the chimney itself. I wanted to add a top to that, so that's made from a knitting needle in a pencil sharpener to give it a bit more of a point, and then glued on and painted up. The other modification I've made is the addition of a few LEDs, so these are just wired up with some enamel wire with the enamel sanded off at the appropriate points, and they're attached to the kind of joist A-beam things. To add the really fine details to the interior parts, for example the black on the line diagram and the token machine and things like that, I used a 0.1mm engineering pen, which seemed to work quite well. So yeah, like I say, I'm really quite pleased with how that's just turned out so far. In the next part of this mini-series, I'll have a look at the electronics, so how we're going to hopefully control the levers in the signal box and the semaphore signal and the points on the baseboard. So if you're interested in that, please do subscribe, and thanks for watching to the end. Catch you next time.